Laura McClady, one of the facilitators, along with Mary Johnson, Salika Cheryl, Jackie Walton Edwards, Jackie Edwards Walton, Anthony McGarrett, and Winston Robinson, and of course Steve Johnson. But we'd like to get started with a prayer. And Sarita, you can lead us in prayer.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we are so happy to be here for another Tuesday, the first Tuesday in April 2023. The sight of this day is beautiful, and for that we're thankful to you. So we're thankful for the opportunity to feed our minds until they are filled with new knowledge this morning, affording us the opportunity to be better informed so that we can better inform our friends and our neighbors in our city and our county and our state. Bless our country this morning, Father. Bless our state, bless our county, bless our city and our neighborhoods and our homes. It's in your Son Jesus' name we pray. Let us say together, amen.
Just to share information, Steve Crump will be with us this morning. And he has a documentary that he wants to share on Andrew Young. And of course, this being the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And unfortunately, and keep him in your prayers, he had to be readmitted this morning to the hospital. So we're going to reach out to him. Steve, I think, has made it available for him to see us on the line this morning. And he's willing to call in as well to talk about his video that his documentary that he's prepared for us. And he asked to come to do this day a couple of weeks ago. So with that being said, I'd just like to say we're going to have George and Ken that's going to elaborate. This is a 26-minute documentary that will be shared. And after which we will have just an open discussion, and with George and Ken, who will be our panelists, and we will open it up at that time.
We were the least of these. Now we are the privileged. And it's our job to pass on the blessings that have come to us through God and Jesus.
Moving insights from a man who touched hearts, influenced public policy, and improved the human condition.
It was a time for people to stand up and do what was right.
Andrew Young clings to gut-wrenching sacrifices made by the unsung and well-known individuals.
John Lewis has always been a saint.
Before leading the city of Atlanta, his journey was well documented.
Ambassador, my leader, Doctor, Andy, Congressman, Mayor, Reverend.
Moments from such an incredible life, largely influenced by an iconic legend.
We always knew that people would die. But Dr. King felt that he was the one most likely to die.
Powerful lessons that have found a new life in print.
So it's been my privilege and my pleasure to know him and to write about him.
Writings loudly validating his spiritual teachings.
Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, heal the sick, solve the problems of the world, and you will receive blessings.
His name and image are etched into the Georgia tapestry, as well as the valued contributions of this man who impacted the American civil rights timeline. Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Crump. Andrew Young's passion for equity and equality publicly started in the 1950s and has extended here into the 21st century. Many of those he linked arms with are being acknowledged here publicly in the city of Atlanta. He didn't go at it alone. It took a team effort. Life-changing risk that's brought a share of social rewards and influence as well as impacted the American landscape through Andrew Young's Datelines of Protest. In his 90s, it's no surprise Andrew Young attracts attention like a modern-day rock star. He is. Autographed books fit for a coffee table bear his signature, and pages of personal stories demonstrate curious demands for printed words, and so do one-on-one photo ops. Such a rich and remarkable life defines his existence through years of prestigious titles: UN ambassador, Georgia congressman, and Atlanta mayor, to name a few. Broad success for this man on a series of notable platforms didn't come easier overnight. Born in New Orleans and educated at Washington, D.C.'s Howard University, accomplishments and achievements were realized early on through the power of protest. Decades later, he still keeps the faith.
And I am faithful about America. I'm faithful about this planet. And I'm faithful about white people. And I'm faithful about black people. And I just believe that everybody deep down in their heart, they believe we shall overcome.
Passionate pursuit of social justice has been his main objective for decades. It evolved from what could be called an epiphany moment at age 19. 30 miles south of the Carolinas' largest city, Charlotte, is the community of Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Once a textile giant and known for a well-publicized battle during the Revolutionary War, Kings Mountain served as home to the African-American-operated Lincoln Academy boarding school. It is where Young's family stayed during a return trip to Louisiana back in 1951 after he graduated from Howard University. At Howard, Andrew Young was a member of the university track team, and in Gaston County, North Carolina, a morning jog through these Tar Heel hills changed his life.
And so I was in very good shape, but I was running too fast because it was going downhill. And instead of slowing down, I decided I was going to run up Crowder Mountain. And I must have passed out or something, I don't know. I got to the top. But when I kind of caught my breath and opened my eyes, the world just looked different.
It's a story he shared with an audience at Charlotte's Johnson C. Smith University.
I saw this Carolina sky, and trees suddenly looked like, they were glistening. And there was a cornfield, and it was beautiful. And there was a field with cows in it. And everywhere I looked, everything seemed to be doing what it was supposed to do. And it suddenly hit me. I didn't see anything, nobody spoke any voices, but there was some voice within me that said, well, whoever made all of this made everything with a purpose.
Seen as a spiritual awakening, the story is highlighted in the 2022 release of The Many Lives of Andrew Young, written by Ernie Suggs. The two joined forces for a book tour from city to city.
So when Jimmy Carter was elected president and Andrew Young was named the United States ambassador to the United Nations, he became a touchstone for me as a black leader, kind of like one of those first black leaders that I understood. So I knew him as an ambassador before I knew him as a civil rights leader.
However, his leadership assisted in moving a nation forward, not only through a presidential appointment as the UN ambassador and as a Georgia congressman, but factor in the effectiveness of previous demonstrations.
We wanted our protest to be serious, and we were challenging laws that we felt were unjust.
Attempts at eliminating signs of American oppression came 10 years after his North Carolina mountain experience. Andrew Young publicly joined forces with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. By that time, Young had become an ordained minister, husband, and father.
I've never lived in a time when everything was on trial. Everything that we have believed in, everything that we have fought for.
Albany, Georgia proved to be a fierce and volatile battleground in a blatantly two-tiered society. Throughout a number of southern cities, shopping boycotts proved to be successful, but Young recalled how economic strategy aimed at this community fizzled.
If we could have stayed in Albany and kept the boycott on as tight as it was for an entire 90-day period, a boycott has to last 90 days.
Challenging new federal laws designed to shut down segregated waiting rooms at places of interstate transportation was the intent of activists seeking change. Known for its violent moments, 1961's Freedom Rides first brought social justice organizations to Albany seeking to empower the excluded. And chronicling these protests was ethnomusicologist Alan Lomax through an album titled Freedom in the Air.
And their music, along with the music of the Black church, took us in, kept us together. I've said without music, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings.
While a number of communities eased their rules of segregation in the early 60s, Albany's power structure didn't back down. If Dr. King was the protagonist in the Albany movement, then the city's police chief, Laurie Pritchard, was the primary antagonist who took great pride in locking up demonstrators. However, Young remembers another hindrance. It came from our nation's capital and the Attorney General.
The thing that defeated us in Albany was not Laurie Pritchard, but Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy took out a federal injunction against us. We didn't mind breaking local and state injunctions, but we really had a respect for the federal government.
What was carried out between the fall of 1961 and summer of 1962 is being characterized as the first mass movement in the modern civil rights era with the goal of desegregating an entire community. In his book, An Easy Burden, Andrew Young writes, the situation in Albany was so polarized that the white leadership of the city would not even talk with the movement leaders. When the protests in Albany ended, local decision makers failed to ease the burden of racism and held on to its segregated traditions.
We understood the power of nonviolence, and we took the time to prepare. For instance, we had a movement in Birmingham in 1963. But we started working in Birmingham toward the end of 1962 and took 2 months of preparation.
Well before Dr. King, Andrew Young, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference targeted Birmingham, the movement to bring equity to Alabama's largest city was initially carried out by local minister Fred Shuttlesworth.
I don't remember anybody getting bit by a dog. And the only person that got hurt by the fire hoses was Reverend Shuttlesworth. And because he stood up to the fire hoses, I got behind a tree.
Thriving mills gave Birmingham the nickname of the Steel City, but issues here were no different than those in Albany, Georgia. The effort known as Project C became the planned strategy of ending segregation and second-class citizenship for African Americans. C stood for confrontation.
If we were blocked from downtown, we would go to the malls. If we couldn't get to the malls, we would go to the federal installations. Fine, that would be one way to bring the federal government into it.
And we really thought we could redeem the soul of America, and never doubted it. And it has almost happened.
Attempted redemption brought aggressive pushback from Sheriff Eugene Bull Connor, who had a notorious reputation for conflict and abuse. Across Alabama, simmering tension linked to racially charged violence went well beyond Birmingham. On June 17, 1963, the federal government stepped in to ensure the safety of the University of Alabama's first African American students. Hours later, President Kennedy delivered a speech to the nation on the topic of civil rights, but after his address, life ended for Mississippi's NAACP field director, Medgar Evers. He took a direct hit from a sniper's bullet in the driveway of his Jackson home.
I'll never forget that day because I was in Birmingham, and Fannie Lou Hamer and about 6 or 8 of our staff people were in jail in Mississippi.
Reminders of organized resistance of change have a place in Birmingham's Kelly Ingram Park. Police attack dogs, fire hoses, and cells of incarceration provide the flashbacks, and in the case of Dr. King being locked up, inspired the now famous letter from Birmingham jail released in June of 1963. His passionate words loudly questioned the town's morality for supporting a less than equal way of life for African Americans.
And so as the lawyers smuggled his writings out on toilet paper and newspaper and whatever paper they could supply him with, my secretary and I translated it.
3 months after the letter went public, 250,000 people blanketed the nation's capital for the March on Washington. And 3 weeks later, at Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church, all hell broke loose when a Sunday morning bomb blast killed 4 young girls.
I remember Dr. King calling me and said, "Why, we're in trouble." I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "They bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church and 4 little girls got killed." He said, "The people in the black community, they're going to blame me for it." I said, "No, they won't blame you."
We can't get freedom till we get new.
2013 marked the 50th anniversary of such a tragic event, and a series of commemorative moments acknowledge great personal sacrifice.
We had a unified community, but this was crunch time. And when Dr. King went to jail, there had been about 500 people who stood up in church claiming to go with him, but only about less than 50 showed up. And I think only 4 preachers. And but that was as it was. Most of the preachers were already in jail.
While jail became reality for those attempting to bring change to Birmingham, Young says African Americans turned their struggle into a pocketbook issue.
It wasn't so much Bull Connor that won in Birmingham. It was that 300,000 black folk didn't buy anything but food and medicine for 90 days.
The grim Jim Crow laws we had in the Birmingham started to break down, and they started to break down in part because the world started focusing on Birmingham, and business leaders here finally decided enough is enough.
Some attitudes did change when city officials agreed to remove offensive Jim Crow signs.
When I was in Birmingham, Alabama, a white gentleman came to me and said, "Congressman Lewis, I want to apologize to you on behalf of all of the white people of the state for what we did." It takes courage to do that.
This was the day the Hawaiians came in. A group came from Hawaii and brought leis.
Walk through the home of Andrew Young, and the walls offer a visual narrative detailing a series of powerful, telling, and meaningful experiences. Among his journeys of past protest, one locale resonates loudly.
I had my first date with my wife in Selma.
Selma is the well-known seat of power in Alabama's Dallas County, a southern city with a documented reputation connected to violence and voting rights. Selma is deeply etched in America's civil rights timeline.
When I came back here in 1958, as the first black person dedicated or dumb enough to open a law office in, of all places in the country, Selma, Alabama, there were less than 70 black people registered to vote out of thousands. And each one of these had to be vouched for usually by a white person.
What we had decided was that we'd done all we could do with one town like Birmingham. And we had to find a way to do things statewide to get national attention. It was mostly ordinary people that made Selma work.
Ordinary people with the intent of increasing African American voting rolls. Individuals like students, school teachers, factory workers, and an activist by the name of Reverend C.T. Vivian, who put his body in the way for the right to vote. Like Laurie Pritchard in Albany and Bull Connor in Birmingham, resistance came from Sheriff Jim Clark in Selma.
This man was very cruel. He was vicious. He wore a gun on one side, a nightstick on the other side. He carried an electric cat prodder in his hand, and he didn't use it on cows.
Sheriff Clark was very instrumental through what happened during March 7th, 1965, on the day known as Bloody Sunday, as protesters attempted to march to the state capitol in Montgomery in an attempt to demonstrate the need for the right to vote.
The only thing I could recall when I fell to the ground, I felt like I was going to die. I thought I saw death.
Dr. King was not in Selma when this violence erupted. He relied on Andrew Young as his eyes and ears.
I was right at the foot of I was right there on the bridge when the canister started and the people started coming back.
We could see the tear gas smoke drifting and hear people screaming and carrying on, and we realized what was happening.
And I was trying to help people get those that were falling and hurting. We were trying to get them into the ambulances to get them back to the church.
Express denial came from the Dallas County Sheriff despite visual evidence to the contrary.
And we went to every first aid place in Selma, hospitals, black and white hospitals, black and white doctors, and not a one of them ever reported in that they were damaged.
2 days after the violence, Dr. King tested Alabama's political machinery in what's often characterized as Turnaround Tuesday by walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But it would take 3 tries before a successful march would be completed between Selma and the state capitol in Montgomery.
It was just a logistical nightmare, which we couldn't have done without the presence of churches. Churches and trade unions came down, and they were the pit crew.
Persistence paid off. 4 months after Bloody Sunday in July of 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law.
The passage of the Voting Rights Act was a very important victory, and one that President Lyndon Johnson deserves 90% of the credit for, because we couldn't have gotten it through Congress with anybody else.
In 1969, members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were summoned to Charleston, South Carolina, assisting healthcare employees demanding equal pay in the workplace during their fight, known as the Charleston Hospital Workers' Strike.
By organizing and beginning to bargain collectively in the hospital, they're creating an opportunity to earn a decent living and to better the working and living conditions in the state.
Resolving the work stoppage brought some of the movement's best-known faces to South Carolina's Lowcountry, including Andrew Young, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, Reverend Joseph Lowry, and Coretta Scott King. For Mrs. King, it was her first public appearance since the death of her husband the year before, during April of 1968 in Memphis.
He insisted on going to Memphis because he wanted to be identified with the poorest of the poor.
The Tennessee trip was designed to assist the city's striking sanitation workers.
We was happy. All of us was happy. You were talking about shouting and hollering. If Dr. King gonna come in town and march with us, sure, you'd be surprised. People's coming out the woodwork.
During the peak of the protest outside of room 306 of the Lorraine Motel, the nation was jolted on the night of April 4th, 1968.
I said, guys, let's go. We have a rally tonight after dinner. I turned to go down the stairs. I got 4 or 5 steps and the shot rang out. Kapow! People started ducking behind cars. I looked back, he had been knocked from the railing back onto the floor. I rushed to his side. There was a gaping hole in the right side of his face.
Thousands of admirers come to Memphis year after year on the anniversary of his death as a way of paying tribute to the amazing life of a doer and dreamer, and that includes his surviving children.
Destiny would have it that he would be taken by a bullet and his very blood would be spilled on this balcony because there was life in the blood.
Andrew Young, who was also on this balcony when Dr. King's life ended, understands the importance of such sacrifice.
The thing about death that Dr. King used to say is that you can't let it stop you. He'd say to be really a free man, you've got to overcome the love of wealth and the fear of death.
Risk in this man's remarkable journey that have brought its share of global rewards. Over the years, he's been fearless in battling causes designed to lighten a heavy load for the oppressed. And at a time when many are slowing down, Young's sunset years are spent preparing for his next big stand.
I can't slow down and can't stop, as I know that any success I've had along the way came from the blood of those kids and those leaders that gave their lives that the rest of us might be able to live much better than we ever thought we could.
For years, Andrew Young followed the lead of his longtime friend and colleague John Lewis by getting into, quote, good trouble. It's that kind of trouble that managed to lead to change that is often tested by time in an ever-changing political landscape. That's Andrew Young's Datelines of Protest from Vine City in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Steve Crump. Thanks so much for joining us.
We're having some audio problems this morning, but we like to I think that Steve has said that people cannot see through the live streaming, so it is nice to see so many of you here so we can share this. But what I like to do at this time, and I'm going to call Steve. Steve, as I mentioned, for those that weren't here earlier, Steve Crump had to be admitted back into the hospital this morning. So he shared this with us, and I can get him on the phone because we're going to have him to share information, and keep him in your prayers. But what I'd like to do now is ask for George and Ken, who will serve on our panel, to come up so we can talk about the assassination. This is the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I asked them to come up because Ken is, if you know Ken, he's a historian anyway, and George is as well, as they have been engaged in the civil rights movement. And as you look at them, you know they're well seasoned. They've been around for a while too.
Dripping with seasoning. Dripping with seasoning.
I like that word.
You got it, girl. It's all yours.
Laura, if he was in the hospital, why would we want to call him?
Oh no, he wants to do this. He called us this morning, but he's willing to, he's willing to speak. That's what it's his request. Okay, we know that George was very close to the circle, with the former mayor of Atlanta, Andrew Young. And this, as I shared, this is one of his newest documentaries that we hope can be shared with quite a few people. Even though we've had a problem with our listening or looking audience this morning in hearing us, we'd like to make sure that you all are here and this is recorded and you can go back later on and review the entire video from this morning. So without any further ado, I'd like to just open it up to to Ken and George to share information about their closeness and recollection of things that happened during the assassination or their involvement with the support of the civil rights movement. So we'll start with George.
Okay. Before we start with George, to the viewing and listening audience out there, Steve will have the documentary in its entirety posted on the website. So after we finish today, at any time during your leisure, you can go to the website and actually see that full documentary again. George?
Okay. I'm not so sure of just what all I'm going to talk about. I was wondering. But for several years, I worked for SCLC as a mere babe. I came out of Savannah, Georgia with Hosea Williams, who was on the other side of Andy as one of the lieutenants for Martin Luther King. From that perspective, I was pretty well acquainted with Andy and what was going on and many of the arrests and the incidents that took place. One of the things, Andy has always been the diplomat in the crew. Jose was the protagonist and the direct action kind of guy. If you look at some of the things in Andy's books, I think it will attest to that. And as a result of that, I had the opportunity of being there in first stage. Somebody said that one of the things I had the opportunity to do was when Dr. King was killed, a lot of us were in Atlanta preparing to go somewhere. It was always, we didn't know exactly where we were going. I was on the field staff as a field organizer. I had been working in Alabama, but at that time I had come back to Atlanta. My daddy was insistent. I'm still trying to get out of Armstrong State University and running here and running there. And all this stuff was happening pretty, there was never an opportunity that was good. So we took off and came to Atlanta as Dr. King was killed, and we were wondering just what were we going to do next. My role next was to prepare for Dr. King's body coming back to Atlanta along with others. I must have been about, I was young. And I say that because there was so many people there. I worked with YT, worked with C.T. Vivian, worked with Abernathy. And so when you looked at it, Jesse Jackson was around everybody jockeying. And then I guess I was that lesser of two evils when somebody says, all right, we want everything in line. Half the guys were still in Memphis. And so Coretta was on a jet headed to go into Memphis. So my role was the reception coming back in. Should you happen to go to Ebenezer Church in Atlanta, especially the old sanctuary, on the day of the funeral, you would see I stand there. We were in Jose's crew was in charge of crowd control, and there we were, half of the guys pulling that mule. What do you call that one? That's it. Pulling that wagon were from SCLC's staff. One of the things that Steve did not capture, and I'm surprised that he didn't, because it made the Selma movement look like it happened kind of out of a plan. But in Marion, Alabama, a few days earlier, Jimmy Lee Jackson, a young soldier, was killed. And at the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson being killed trying to protect his mother and grandmother, we heard that his grandmother and grandfather, rather, we heard that somebody was going to be killed. We thought it was James Orange, who was in jail in Perry, Alabama. So we were assigned to go to Perry, Alabama. And I tell you, all it takes is a shot for everybody to start moving. We were non-violent, but we were not non-foolish. You know, bullets had no name. And yet we were trying to quell the crowd. Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot in Marion County, but there are no hospitals in Marion County. So Jimmy Lee's body had to go to Selma. And in going to Selma, a few days later, Jimmy Lee Jackson died. At that point, James Bevel, who was also on staff, was assigned to Marion County. And as he did, he says, what we're going to do, we're going to take Jimmy Lee to Alabama. Selma would have never happened if Marion County, Alabama had the capacity for what was to come. So the body went to Selma, and thus the march from Selma to Montgomery. And so just a point of some of those everything looks a whole lot different 50, 60 years later, but a lot of stuff went on. There were a lot of jockeying that took place. When we look at things that occurred, Dr. King was kind of the icing on the cake. I worked for 40 years for the YMCA, and one of the lessons I learned was that the CEO never comes out first. When the CEO comes out, it is the association's problem. You know, until then, I used to run McCory, and if McCory had a problem, that was my problem. When it came to be an association problem, somebody else took over. So the whole Albany thing, I worked in just outside of Albany, and there's a hanging tree between Albany and Plains where Jimmy Carter's peanut farm is. And they were still lynching black folks at that time. And so one went to jail for trying to burn the tree down. So there was a lot of resistance in spite of things that happened and took place. Now, so I'm gonna hush and let Ken pick up what I didn't say and should have said.
Well,
hold on.
No.
Please,
No.
these are two very
No.
prominent
No.
men from Charlotte. I can barely hear. I would like for them to speak up because everything that you're saying, it almost brings tears to my eyes because I feel like our children don't know this history. And I want the people who are listening in to hear this. This
come down.
Do we have the audio fixed yet, Steve? Can anyone hear?
Yes, now we can.
That's much better. Thank you.
That's much better. Okay, I guess you can stay there then. There's really nothing that I could add in the context of what happened at Selma and what happened at Memphis. I will say that I had some personal experiences with the Selma bridge, but nothing as close to or as significant as what George and others have shared. My experience at Selma simply was that my family every summer would drive 1,300 miles from Corpus Christi, Texas to Charlotte, North Carolina to visit my mother's side of the family. And there was no interstate system to speak of at that time. The colored signs were quite prominent all along the way. We never owned a new car, and we certainly never owned an air-conditioned car. But we had to make that trek every summer. And a couple of times we made it twice during the summer. I bring that up because on Highway 80, which that goes across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we had to cross that bridge. And my vivid memory of Selma was the fact that on one side of the bridge there was an Esso gas station that we would traditionally stop at because they were reasonably decent people, reasonably so. And I don't recall if they had an actual colored restaurant. And also on that same side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and I believe it was the south side of it, there was a very popular and very good barbecue restaurant that we would stop and get food and eat there. Now, I called it the Black Belt, and that was Highway 80. From the time we hit Highway 80 in Shreveport, Louisiana, all the way through the time we would hit a portion of the then under construction 85 north of Atlanta, near Greenville. There was probably 60 to 70% of the people we saw on the sides of the roads in the towns that we went through were black folk. And so we always knew that we could count on places to stop. And at one time spending a night in Tuskegee during a massive storm and staying with some folks because somebody at a white gas station told us to go down there in Colored Town. There was a lady that would take boarders overnight. But Selma, Alabama, if you'll recall, a few years ago, they had a major observance. I think it was the 60th anniversary of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or maybe it was the 50th, but bottom line, that whole Edmund Pettus Bridge celebration was in part devised by and orchestrated by a young woman who was a 1964-65 graduate of Johnson C. Smith, whose name is Rose Gaines Sanders, and who went to Selma after law school and became a prominent lawyer there, married a man, and they started their own law practice there. And I had an occasion to visit them back in '72. And in my estimation, she is a greatly unsung hero as it relates to the observance of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And our own university, Johnson C. Smith University, has failed to see any merit in incorporating her when they have their annual Arc of Triumph, because she was certainly a hero. Not only did she become a prominent lawyer, but she became a judge. Her husband went into the state legislature, and I think it is that their son also became an attorney. Daughter became an attorney. So that would be my relationship and ties to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And it is my hope that they never change the name of it, because if you do, you then tend to forget or others don't know. And lest we forget, we're destined to repeat. So that would be my input. And George, while we've known each other for a long time, He helped my profitability at the Excelsior Club.
Amen.
Sometimes you ought to take to your grave.
That don't stop because we have a sign that says what goes on here, what you see here, stays here. So that's it, George. I ain't said nothing.
Broke it out, though. But among the things that you did say that I'm mindful of is that one thing about that struggle you'll see Andy Young, you'll see when you walk across the bridge, sometimes history paints the picture and trying not to take anything away. John Lewis wasn't there by himself.
Yeah.
You know, there was a woman from Savannah, Georgia, Amelia Boynton Robinson. Next to John was Jose Williams. That first line, that second line, there's a woman now in Selma with equal prominence to Rose, Joanne Bland. The list goes on, or Reverend Reese. You know, you gotta go back to the role of the church, as Andy said. And you got Brown's Chapel AME Church. And that role was where those places, where those meetings were held, you go back to the church. Trying to get away from those people who were the oppressors. I lived across the street when I was there in George Washington Carver Homes. And it was a project. And, you know, we didn't have anywhere to stay as staff people. And those people opened up their homes to us, and that's where we stayed. And it put them in harm's way as well. So you've got somebody like a Reverend James Reed, who was killed during that same time in between the two marches. You know, so I'm in Atlanta for Bloody Sunday. Then Jose makes the call. Dr. King wants everybody in Selma. And we all head to Selma. So not have to turn around Tuesday, but for that next march, I was there. Also killed in that process was Viola Liuzzo. Freedom ain't free, y'all. There was a price that was paid for these gains that we have. And sometimes we will trivialize some of those gains because we don't know. One of the things, if I can make just one little, what kind of plug they call that when you talk about yourself?
Shameless.
That's what it is. I'm gonna be shameless. I call myself a dream keeper. I have a company called Majestic Travel that I take people along the Alabama Civil Rights Trail. I just left Selma a couple of weeks ago. In another week, I'm taking a group out of Savannah. We got a group coming out of Atlanta. We go to Birmingham, Selma, Montgomery. We talk about Anniston. And Anniston, there was a picture there when we were talking about the Freedom Riders. That picture came out of Anniston, Alabama, where that Greyhound bus was burned. Can you imagine college students out of Tennessee State and Fisk signing a pact, making their will, anticipating death, and being willing to get on a Greyhound bus? That when you hit Anniston, Alabama, they lock the door and set the bus on fire. I mean, white folks were something else. Y'all call it anything you want to call it. White folks were something else. And then in all of that going on, another crew decides to come. Can you imagine being beaten in Anniston, traveling 75 miles more into Birmingham, and being beaten again at the Greyhound bus station? From there, those who still could and would went on to Jackson, Mississippi. Carlina?
No. Before you do that, the Greyhound bus was a reminder to me that one of those summers we did take the bus from Corpus to Charlotte. I believe it was 61, whatever the year was that they had the federal troops in Montgomery, Alabama. And when the bus rolled into Montgomery, we were instructed that we could not get off the bus. And I remember as a boy looking out the window and seeing the jeeps and the troops and the guns, and just wondering when we were going to get the hell out of here. But from a journalist side, I want to see both sides, And the side that continues missing for me is the SOBs and their descendants. Because forget hell and the South shall rise again is more than just a slogan. It's a way of life. And some of those people, the Connors, the Pritchards, they have descendants. Who are they? Where are they? What are they doing? Are they still committed to carrying on the traditions of the Old South? I'm glad that we keep in the forefront the incidents of what happened to us. But other things as undercurrents are still happening to us because the bloodlines of those people, those guys you saw swinging the clubs and so forth, still live. And those are the people we need to identify and put down on Front Street today, because otherwise we're allowing them to move and operate in the undercurrent as conservative Christians, as conservative Republicans, and others in legislatures where they are implementing laws that bring back those Jim Crow laws that we saw demonstrated in many of those films. And now I'm done.
Okay. I have questions that needs to be asked about Winston and Carlene, okay, and Mary. But before we start the question and answering process, Joyce, because you haven't been with us, I think the rest of everybody understand that we do identify by a show of hands, and we will facilitate the questioning and the answering session. But before we do that, I like to encourage everyone, if you have access to Netflix, I like for you to pull this up. Who We Are is a chronicle of racism in America. And this is by Jeffrey Robinson. And it is very explicit on how we're at a pinnacle and then we roll back. And we keep coming back. We think we are getting there, but we are not. But it's an excellent chronicle of how we are in America. And I was reminded of that when Andrew Young spoke about Robert Kennedy, the federal government stopping what they were trying to do. And we always felt like they were in our favor in everything that we asked them to do. But that was just a reminder of this. So with that being said, our first question is going to come from Carlenia.
Just as a footnote, you saw Lyndon Johnson signing the voting rights bill. Being a Texan and him being a homeboy, the N-word was a part of his normal vernacular in Texas. We need to know that. And when he signed that bill, he had his own dog whistle, just like the one that's going before the grand jury or the court today. He said, when he signed that bill, he told his cohorts, "We just lost the South." And that's, to me, quite a telling statement, because he was telling that constituency, the Bull Connors and the others, that when I signed this bill, boys, we can't be doing this no more. And a lot of folks are going to vote against our side of the coin for a while. But he did do the right thing by signing it, and I don't think it was so much out of the goodness of his heart, but it was politically expedient to do that.
Okay, Carlos.
You also have to remember that he put a sunset in it, Section 5, which meant that it would last for 25 years. So, and that was the way it got through. And that's why we're having all of these issues now, more than 25 years after that part. It watered it down. And they were looking at all the things they could do. For every right that we achieved, there was a way that it could be taken away. So, we just got to stay vigilant in the people and stay woke to what's going on.
Okay.
My statement and my question is...
we can't hear you.
Basically, first I want to say thank you to Steve. Steve has done many, he's done many documentaries, and he does such an excellent job. Again, I'm a firm believer that our kids, they don't know what's going on or what has gone on and what has led us to where we are. And I think about even this morning when I heard that they wanted to invite Iowa to the White House too. I said, I'll be dang. But anyway, I didn't say it that way, but I said something else. But, you know, we don't, anyway, that's a whole other subject. George, I heard you say, and I know what Kim's capabilities are, I heard you say that you do tours for Selma. Who does tours for Charlotte, for South Carolina? All this history that is sitting there that people don't know about. And who's exposing this? Because if we had the same governor in North Carolina that we have in Florida, eventually we're not going to be able to say anything. So, you know, I just want to know, do you have a counterpart or someone? You don't have to go all the way to, I mean, you can continue to take your company to Alabama, but who's doing this? There's so much history just along Vegas Fort Road.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anyone is doing it. You know, and my interest for what I do came out of the work that I did. It doesn't demean the fact that we've got Rock Hill down the road with what happened there with those guys who went to jail in Rock Hill. It does not demean what happened at Orangeburg. And so, you know, when we began to take a look all along the South, you know, how do we look over Frank McCain and the guys who were at Greensboro? You know, and so what we looked at was Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery. I think that the rise of Brian Stevenson and those two museums that came up in Montgomery was a part of the impetus. We also do Atlanta, but it was just a business ploy. And so as a result, the kind of thing we look at is how do we develop the awareness for where you are? And that's really what I try to present. You know, you can come back and do that same thing wherever you are. You know, when I worked for SCLC and when we look back at the 60s, the changes in the 60s were brought about by young people. When we talk about the change in Birmingham, those were kids that were in those streets primarily. Their parents could not, were unable to get out there for whatever the reason, the thought of losing jobs and the like. But young people brought those changes about. Albany, young people were the ones who went to jail. Before I was 21, I'd been to jail 11 times in 3 states. You know, so, you know, when you look at it, it becomes one of those things where we've got to continually tell the story wherever we are. What with Booker T, wherever you are, drop your bucket down for a draw. We've got to do it wherever we are and sort of pull those things back into place. So it was not that, it was just where it was, and it was a sign of the times. And I know more about those 3 places.
Okay.
To your point, Carlene, and I don't mean to disparage the movement, but a lot of business opportunities have grown out of some of this stuff. And the sooner we can start recognizing business opportunities from a business perspective, some of those things that you talk about can happen. But the first time somebody comes up and says, I want to do a black tour and so forth, then somebody else is going to say, well, you going to charge us to do that? It's a business opportunity. This is a capitalist system, and everywhere you can find a business opportunity, talk to some entrepreneurs about the possibility of making this thing happen. And it can happen. And when you talk about young people, George is exactly right. It was young people who were led by wisdom. And many of those folks who were in the leadership hadn't even hit 60 yet. But here we are in a community where only people, we can elect the people 60 years old, and then they get there and think they're supposed to become 100 years old and sit in those same seats. And we lose our young people because the old folk won't realize they have an expiration date. And we allow them to continue to stay. And the whole thing about insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And as far as some of this stuff is concerned about getting information out there, churches would be a prime example of how we could take the argument of CRT away from the public environment and schools because of the resistance, and we know the possibility. Get some churches to offer CRT as coalitions. Heck, some of them scared to probably take it on themselves, so they don't want to do CRT as it relates to the stuff that they're preaching every Sunday. So therein lies the great opportunities that we don't explore. And young people that I have talked to them have been just begging for information, begging for opportunities, begging for directions. And we don't respond. I'm 74 years old. You'll never find my name on a public office ballot.
Thank you.
And everybody 60 and over, why the hell are you running?
Okay. Winston.
Good morning. First of all, Ms. Curlin, to your question, me, it's coming soon, West Side Bus Tour. Mr. Ken and I have already had a discussion about it. And
before you do it, make sure you at least have conversation with those who've been around.
that was the whole point of talking to Mr. Believe me, it's
Okay.
gonna do right. And don't leave out there, we're gonna learn that. Ms. Mary, pass me out, get text message.
Order.
Okay.
We still are in session right now.
We are.
We need to stay in order, and we don't need dialogue back and forth, okay?
Right.
So.
You're right, absolutely. So my question is, first of all, to Mr. George, this is blowing my mind. You know, I've seen you a million times. I had no context of this history as, you know, literally right next door to me. I'm in Crory Heights, so we'll talk after this. But to bring things back to the date of April 4th and the assassination of Martin Luther King, you know, of course we know about, I believe the people in this room know Martin Luther King was actually supposed to be here in Charlotte for a gubernatorial fundraiser for Dr. Reginald Hawkins. Now, and this is where I just want your opinion. When we look back to those days of '68, I personally believe, so this is a personal theory of mine, that Martin Luther King would have been too noticeable, too noteworthy to have to stay at the Alexander Hotel in Brooklyn. And I know in civil rights you kind of stay with the people who hosted you. So if Martin Luther King were to come to Charlotte, do you believe he likely would have stayed with Dr. Hawkins in McCrory Heights, or would he have gotten room? You know, like how does that work when you travel between spaces and when you are as notable as Dr. King?
Well, first thing is that the group that was there got there before him, along with locals, were going to find out where he was going to be the safest and find a spot where they were going to be most likely. I think he could have very easily stayed with Dr. Hawkins. Remember black preachers now. You know, a preacher come to town, the other preacher take care of him.
Going to the Carolina.
No, we wasn't going there then. But all I guess I'm saying is probably so. And if the other hotel had been a place where he could have been secure, then yeah.
Can I answer that? Dr. Hawkins was my husband's uncle.
Yeah.
He was going to stay at McCrory Heights, and we don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that was not public knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, Mary has the next question.
Oh, I remember those days, you know, of colored only and that kind of thing, even though I was very, very young. That went on for a long time, even after Johnson signed the I mean, it still didn't change a lot of things, right? And I had friends who were in a part of SNCC, so I heard a lot about, what they did in their travels. But I can't understand the part about the black churches, and I'm not sure if you can even answer this question, but what happened that the black churches stopped being the forefront of this movement? And also, I just want to say this, my husband's grandfather, and this was back, I guess, in the 50s or something, early 60s, he came from deep in South Carolina up to Columbia to buy a car. He had saved up to buy the car. And on his way back, back to his town, the two state troopers stopped him, okay? And they told him to get out of the car and give him the keys. And that trooper drove off. One of them drove off with his car, and he never saw his car again. And this was the kind of thing that happened. And this is why, there's an anger. We wonder why our children are so angry. And this kind of anger, it goes through generations, So,
I think one of the things I would think that happened with the black church and the church's engagement was money and government interference. The government looked to suppress us. To your other point, the Voting Rights Act was signed. After the Voting Rights Act was the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act was the one that would have opened up public accommodation, or some sense of it. To Ken's point, and to your point as well, we took color down, but we put up 1, 2, 3. You ever been around, those of you who are old enough and just seen a restroom that had 1, 2, 3? Number 1 was white women. Number 2 was white men. Number 3 was anybody that had to go. And so we took the sign down, but we put up another symbol. So, when you look at it that way, we've come a long way. But remember now, there were many churches that had questions around their status as I don't know if a church is a 501c3, but it's not taxable, but their property. The preacher used to be able to hold rallies, to talk about voting. The civil rights movement would never have gone forward without the involvement of the black church. And then once they got in there and money started flowing, and the testing as a large part of it, of their tax statuses. And then we got that money for community development. And money, and one of Jose Williams' things was always unbought and unbossed. And we had, as we got senior citizen housing, as we got child development centers, the church leader moved away from being able to talk about politics. And most big churches today do not specifically talk about politics. A candidate of an ilk would be able to come by your church. Now that doesn't happen very much. All they do is stand up and wave. And we used to have literally almost an endorsement. You go back to the 60s, church buses were a large part of taking people to register to vote. Montgomery, Alabama, 1955. Church buses and church cars served as taxis that propelled a movement and a boycott to go for 381 days. That whole city galvanized itself around a point, and the church was the place. The church's importance, remember now, Martin Luther King, his whole rise to fame came about as a young 26-year-old preacher in Montgomery, Alabama, where Vernon Johns was a very, very, very outspoken preacher
who called it like it was, talked to that church about what they needed to do, and one of the deacons said he was too boisterous for that group. And they were looking for a new leader for the Montgomery Improvement Association. There were 2 or 3 people running. Vernon Johns was one. Somebody said, let's go get that new preacher. He is well-spoken and untarnished. Martin Luther King became the head of a movement that made him become what he was. Didn't seek it, didn't choose it, suffer if he abused it, give an account if he loses it. A tiny minute of that election that brought about Martin Luther King. And so the church has been very, very relevant. Well, just a side point for you. Who do you think now owns 16th Street Baptist Church? If you get to Alabama and you start watching what the National Park Services are doing, who do you think just got through redoing Brown's Chapel Church in Selma, Alabama? National Park Service. Who refurbished the SCLC building and Martin Luther King's Eternal Flame on the National Park Service? Who is behind that whole rebirth of the Gaston Motel? And Gaston was a black millionaire in Birmingham, owned a restaurant, the funeral home, the ambulance service. Anything y'all needed, Gaston owned it. Who do you think is bringing all of that stuff back? The National Park Service. Who's the largest storyteller currently in the National Park Service? So that involvement between government and the church, that argument of the separation between church and state, which to a large extent began to quell our voices from the pulpit, I should say, still takes a whole lot of precedence on where and how we see ourselves today.
Okay, Gary.
I just want to thank everybody for being here, and I appreciate you brothers sharing your knowledge and your experiences during that time. My question is, before I make a statement, real quick, do you think Martin Luther King died in the hospital? And was it really the bullet wound that killed him? My statement real quick.
That's a deep state question.
Go ahead.
Dr. John Henry Clark, master professor. If you start your history with slavery, everything will look like progress. Dr. John Henry with a K, Clark with an E. If you don't even know your own history, anyone can fool you. All of us have been fooled for years based on his story. As far as the church goes, Malcolm X said, if churches unified and uplifted the black community, the FBI would have blew them all up. So, back to my question. Do you think he really died from that wound, or did he die because of some other situation in the hospital, based on research and what you know? I don't even know if you ever thought about it, but I just thought I'd ask that question.
We did, but I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. The contention was that the bullet wound was severe enough because half of that side of the head was blown away. Where he actually died, I don't know, but I heard several conspiracy theories around people who were close to it. So the bullet wound was severe enough to cause death, but I don't know where he actually died. There are those who would say he died on that balcony.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just for the sake of clarity, hospitals often are the places where death is proclaimed or announced or determined. One could leave a place dead, arrive DOA, that's dead on arrival, or they could take that already dead person or doomed to death person to the hospital, try to save him, and at the end proclaim him or pronounce him dead at the hospital. So it's just simply, quite frankly to me, a matter of what you choose to believe.
Thank you. What I'd like to ask and to share with you guys is that we have been given permission to stay in here a little longer if you'd like to keep this dialogue going. I have quite a few questions, so I'd like for you all to stay as long as you can so we can continue this conversation, because it is good.
Well, again, I mean, this has been wholesome, to say the least. You spoke on a little earlier about folks getting involved in politics, and I was told by somebody, and it really resonated with me more than they know, that we as a black people, we tend to vote for the devil that we know. My rebuttal was, why vote for a devil at all?
Yeah.
What do we need to do to get more younger folks involved in politics? I mean, I have my own ideas, but you were in your heyday, in your peak, you were young doing a lot of the things that we're still trying to get these generations to understand the importance of. Like you said, it came with a price. Freedom came with a price. What do we need to do on both ends to get that younger generation involved and to get our elders to support that younger generation?
Connect the dots between youth and wisdom, desire to know, and will to tell what you know, and consensus. We have, and this is a personal thing for me, out of all the black elected officials we have in Charlotte-Mecklenburg for all the elected bodies, and all of the black leadership that we have in a variety of departments and so forth. Now, anybody here know what ALEC is? The acronym ALEC? Okay, after I make this statement, I'm going to tell you what it is. We do not, and you cannot go to any particular place and find what is called a black agenda. We have no consensus. And for all of my black elected officials out there, it's a shame that you have not found a way to come up with a black consensus agenda. Now, ALEC. ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. Y'all have heard about the Koch brothers and the money and the conservatives and where they get their money from. It's all encapsulated right there in ALEC. That's their Bible. You mentioned the devil. There's some black devils too. And the problem is, as I see it, we have no consensus on an agenda, clearly defined, and then we have no measuring stick as to whether, if one exists, whether we are achieving goals and objectives and adhering to what that agenda is. When we can get that and then get those two, old and young, together to move toward that consensus, then we may see some better outcomes. And by the way, no, I'm going to leave that alone.
No, say it, please.
Okay. Did you get your answer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Jasmine.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I am a community organizer and Johnson C. Smith graduate.
Hey.
It's an honor to hear the story that you're saying right now. Especially I'm thinking about Miss Rose. I met Miss Rose, a great lady. Charles Jones, another former member of SNCC, literally right here in the Charlotte community. But with that said, another point to the churches, as a community organizer, when I'm doing this work and I'm talking to preachers who are kind of absent, I'm thinking, Jesus was the original organizer. Why can't you be out here doing this? Because he was doing this from the... Anyway, I wanted to kind of dig deeper with what he was saying. You had mentioned it was the young folks who pretty much ran the movement. I'm thinking, just mention all these young folks we just talked about. And then you just mentioned how we got these old folks still trying to take these seats. And me personally, I've been digging into history, my own history, thinking about my pops. Like, he didn't go to a segregated school till high school. So this history clearly isn't that far away, disconnected from our past. My thing is, how do we bridge? Yeah, he was talking about the youth. How do we bridge this divide? Like, how can we get past the fact, like, again, this didn't happen so long ago. So what is it that we're missing to kind of, for this generational divide to happen? And I'm thinking, as I've been a member of NAACP since I was in high school. And my thing is, they're scared to let youth be leaders now. So how do we go from youth leading stuff to old folks not let youth lead? So how can we bridge that generational divide? And especially let them know that this didn't really happen that long ago.
One of the things that I think we've got to begin to do is have intergenerational conversations. Now let me ask you, how many of you go to your family reunion? So let me tell you about Aunt Sally. She's always Aunt Sally. And to Aunt Sally, we are little George, remember little Ken, and little George and little Ken never grow up until we sit around with Aunt Sally and talk to her and let her tell me why she gave me a little money to go to school, why she told me to go and be all I can be, and why she does not want me to be that now. All you have to do is go to church, and you know that superintendent of Sunday school, some of the things that we have, we got to talk to each other. I think when we began to have these kinds of intergenerational conversations, how many of you will work on a job where you get a leadership position and everybody else or most people there, and you are the supervisor and all of them older than you? And I mean, you got a tough road to hoe. So somehow this is kind of a systemic issue. How do we begin to have those conversations where I don't have to fear you for my position? Do you know what it's like? I retired as the CEO of the YMCA of Newark and vicinities. You know, and my COO was asking me, I hired this boy. His big question to me was, when are you going to retire? And can I take over? You know, I told him I wasn't going to stay forever. You know, that question was, he's ready to move me out. Now, you know, I still consult for him. But the kind of thing that happens, how do we have that conversation where we begin not to think that I'm just lost, where you value me and I value you? And I think I think when I look at it on the corporate side, it's the same conversation. It's an intergenerational conversation that we've got to have. But it's not my idea is better than yours or yours are better than mine. It's just one that we just, you talk to your children, for those of you who got children growing up. I asked my daddy, why don't you let me take care of your money? He said, how much money you got? Not much. When you get some, you come back to me. But it's almost that same kind of thing. Your children question you, you know, and so some of it is going to be something that we've got to work through and work with. And how do we have that appreciation of the difference of age on both sides now? Because old people something else now. Because they go, well, wait, we hard. Well, I work for this. You just want to walk in and take over what I did. And you look back, and one of the things that you look at is that even with the movement, in many cases, there was not much succession planning. Listen back now I digress a little bit to make a point. In his speech in Memphis, Martin Luther King recognized Ralph Abernathy as he never did before. I'm grateful for my good friend Ralph Abernathy. My good friend. He kind of went back and emphasized it. There was so much testosterone on the staff of SCLC and people all around. As long as Doc was there, there were not many challengers. But once he was gone and he was trying to put Ralph in place, you had a whole bunch of folks who wanted to be the leader. Jesse Jackson was thought to be too young, and Jesse was pushing hard. And you got Fred Shuttlesworth pushing back on the other side. You got Andy the Conciliator, you got Jose the Rouser, and it was just there. So I'm not so sure, other than having the conversation as often as we can and then giving rise to that opportunity of what's happening. The other thing we got to do is to help young people to understand where we've come from. And I think that's the big thing, because culture, the gains in the culture cannot be lost with the changing of the guard. So that would be one of my thoughts, and that's something we need to look at. What is the succession plan, and how do we begin to have others to understand what it is that we've overcome, what we want to achieve, and knowing that we need some new blood in order to move us forward. That's my little spiel.
Here's my take on it, and it's to some degree a shameless plug. Intergenerational communication takes place every day at a new facility place called Archive Charlotte. It's a 33-year-old young woman who was a 15-year-old high school unwed mother who just recently, back in August, opened up this, what she intended to be a bookstore. But someone convinced her that she could do more than that, and it is a coffee shop. And it features black ephemera, black books, black stuff. And I unashamedly say that this place has, for me, given me new hope, new life, new blood, new energy, because therein lies intergenerational discussion. And I invite any of you 50, 60 and older to just go through there, of course, buy a cup of coffee, but also have conversation with some of those young people. It's located in the old McDonald's cafeteria spot at the Cell and Batesford Road. There's a Chase Bank on the corner, and it's at the opposite end of that strip. 2023. Batesford Road. And also, what she features there is stuff that young people are coming in and buying and reading, because it does go back to such things as the Jet magazine, that was the only publication that featured the funeral of Emmett Till, because his mother wanted the world to see what racism had done to her son. It features ebony, it features books, lots of stuff that these young people are coming in there and availing themselves to that history. For me, I say it's a new life, because I've been afforded the luxury of being able to go in there and talk to these young people. And they're coming in there with laptops, and you think they're working for somebody, and many of them are their own entrepreneurs, business owners, and successful. But I urge people to go through, not just there, but anywhere you find young people. You don't have to know them. It's amazing what black folk find out about each other when we take a moment to talk to each other. Not just with our own kids, but kids we don't know. So that is one way of creating that information, so that the young people coming along don't make the same mistakes we made, and we don't dissuade them for being courageous enough to try new things. So that's my take on it. And
thank you, Ken. We have Crispin, and then we have Mary again, and then Sarita, and then Gary. Okay.
Okay, my question is, was the fight more for like equity or inclusion? And do you think that we are more dependent now on this system than we were before? Like by us not being able to survive, farm, or have land, or hunt, or just for the basics?
for me personally, I saw it as a fight for freedom, equality, and justice. It wasn't a fight to go sit next to Mary Sue or Bobby. If they had given us the right books or the new books, they had given us the same facilities, if they had given us access to the same water instead of the colored water, or the opportunities to get bank loans and to buy homes and to live wherever we chose, a lot of that stuff probably
would not have happened, because I don't remember, and you were closer than I. Did any of the civil rights guys say, hey, we want to come and sit next to Becky Sue because everything will get automatically better? Or did they just say, give us the freedom and equality that everybody else enjoys? So that's mine.
1963 in Savannah, Georgia. I was one of 7 people that desegregated the schools. I went to school every day in a police car, escort. Every class I went with, I had a police escort. All I heard was that I wanted to sit and be close to a white girl. And, you know, one of my retorts on one day when I got tired of some of that is, look at all the white girls who want to sit next to me. And so the whole thought becomes, one of my coaches was my calculus teacher. And the book that he used as reference at the black school was my book that I used every day as the classroom book. We were not equal. And you know, the whole desegregation of schools was just one thing. Baum versus the Board of Education was 1955. In Savannah, Georgia, it didn't get changed until 1963. It changed as at the 12th grade, where it would be most difficult. When we couldn't buy cars, or we wouldn't drive, my daddy got us a new car. It was only 12 years old, but my daddy got us a new car. You know he wouldn't drive that car to work. And you know, when we look back at what happens, when we look at red lines in communities, where banks lend to one group differently than they lend to another. When we look at the new word of gentrification, how all of in the name of progress, urban renewal was the job done on our communities that was probably worse than any white folks could have ever done. Oh, some more white folks. So a lot of what we think changed took on a different demeanor. So the fight changed and we're still playing the same game. It's almost like us playing football. Ken was a football player. And somebody else on the other team got new pads. We got the old pads that were already beaten down. So our injuries were sustained differently. And so what I'd say to you is that understand the fight. We just got to understand the fight. When you saw that picture of Birmingham, the Steel City, I don't know how many of you have been to Birmingham, but that block around 16th Street Baptist, 16th Street Church, oh, they cleaned us out. There's nothing. The highway system came in and we didn't get a project on the other side. Look at Beattisford Road. Look at what happened in Brooklyn. You know, we used to be a lot closer together. The interstate system across this country separated black communities. So we've got to be aware of the fight. Do we need somebody at the table who understands the game? Sure do. Somebody who's going to cry loud and spare not? Sure do. Whether that's young or whether that's old, we need a fighter in the room. And so I just suggest that we take looks and see that the game didn't go away. It just changed. And so some of those same things are still there, I think.
I recall 1955. 1955, second polygamy was outlawed. My dad had taken a job in South Texas, Nueces County, as the principal of a little elementary school, Phyllis Wheatley in Robstown, Texas. 3/4 of the kids in his school were black, a little black enclave neighborhood there, and Mexicans who were scattered throughout the neighborhood and around. And after the 8th grade from my dad's school, kids were bused 16 miles to Corpus Christi and Solomon Cole's black high school. In 55, Nueces County school system totally desegregated all of its schools and stopped busing the black kids to Corpus, and they all started going to Robstown High School. I played Little League baseball in the integrated Little League system, but when I got out of there and came to places like Raywood, Texas, and
Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Black Little Leagues were in ragtag uniforms, never had a real stadium to play in. So I saw desegregation from a different perspective. And as I used to tell my friend Malcolm Green, you know, you brag about going to Carolina as one of the first blacks in 1963 or 65. I said, we've been desegregated 10 years before they let you come in, and that would be a standing joke between us. But my point being that we were only less than 3% of the population, so it was an easy no-brainer. Let them come. We ain't going to their school, but they're free to come to ours. You know, materials and so forth didn't change that much. So integration never really happened. We had desegregation and freedom of choice. And that's what we've got today, a reasonable, well, it ain't even reasonable. It ain't close to desegregation, and it never would be integration, because integration means that we're sharing each other's cultures and backgrounds and experiences. Desegregation just simply means you can come over here, but I ain't come over there and I ain't giving you nothing of what I got. And if I give you anything, it's going to only be marginal. And then we got people who get elected and endorse that kind of crap.
Okay.
Laura,
Mayor.
I just want to give you a last call on coffee before we start putting everything away.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make another shot at rum and coke.
Mayor.
You got it.
Oh, I was going to say.
Rum and coke.
I don't have rum and coke.
I got some in my trunk, man.
See you after the meeting.
Yeah, got you, Ken.
Ken does not even drink. Go ahead, Mayor.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to say that 2 Wednesdays ago, Wednesday before last, I was in Raleigh, you know, when they passed the Medicaid and all this stuff, right? And, you know, I found out that Mecklenburg County had the lowest voter rate in North Carolina. And as large as we are here, we don't vote. Okay, so there are things going on all around us that's gonna hurt us. You know, like in Florida, you know, they're trying to get rid of the black fraternities and sororities in colleges. If it happens there, it's gonna creep up here and all that kind of stuff. So we need to vote, and I know I was just kind of addressing you because that is something that we gotta do because we've got a supermajority and all of that. And I have a quote that I wanna say, and this comes from Tommy Robinson, who is not here, okay? He used to say, I had to write it down. At the turn of the century, back in the day, black people owned 27 acres of land and had 1 suit. Now we own 27 suits and less than 1 acre of land. And I think that speaks volumes.
Yep.
For
Actually, it was 67 million acres of land, and now we own less than 2.
So I think that's something that we need to think about and voting, those 2 things, home ownership and voting.
One thing, Carly, let me go back to your question, or your statement about who's telling the story. One of the best archives in the country is in Orangeburg, South Carolina, kept by a guy by the name of Cecil Williams. Cecil was a photographer on the scene and has memorialized the black experience across the country. And I think now Cecil has a small museum that's going to get bigger with the help of Jim Clyburn. So, you know, if you go down to Orangeburg, that's one place to look at where some facts are.
National Park Service.
Okay.
I don't think did the Park Service do that?
It's like the National Park Service.
Sarita has a question.
My question is to both of you. Where are your books?
You sound like my sister. I think I'm on chapter 6. And I have been journaling since my sister is a reporter who helped me to bring about my story and starting to write it. So I'm doing that now.
Okay.
Ain't enough people dead yet for me to write my book.
Gary.
So you gonna write about
Gary, you have.
Okay. Don't tell me what happened. Tell me what we're gonna do about it. A lot of folks in leader positions have no leadership skills. They're basically spokespeople that have power. Francis Cress Welsing says, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, rest in peace, racism and white supremacy is a universal system. Dr. John Henrik Clarke says there are no European solutions for African problems. Dr. Chancellor Williams, back in the 70s, said we have been subjected to so much pain and suffering through slavery and mental slavery for hundreds of years that we are unable to unite as a people. My question, Black Wall Street, they blew up everybody. We didn't rebuild. Integration, was it our biggest mistake? Why didn't we rebuild? Why didn't we rebuild Black Wall Street? We had our towns, we had banks, we had businesses. We talk about their histories, we watch videos, and we applaud what we did. Why can't we continue that? Why haven't we continued that?
One word, system.
Well, I know. We live in fear.
No, I didn't say we live in fear.
Well, I'm saying we live in fear.
System is the reason.
Right.
The elimination of the Black Wall Street and the Jim Crow laws, that was part of a system that was implemented. It wasn't the poor white folks that did it. It was Wall Street that pitted the progressive black folks against the Appalachian poor folks. And they sat back and watched it burn. But we collectively have moved intellectually, shall I say, to a level of where we know what the problems are, we know how they were created, but we have not shown the intestinal fortitude to run in lockstep like others have to eliminate some of those or many of those issues. So once we come together and have our own ALEC, as I referenced earlier, therein will we see some real progress or more progress.
Was the last time we boycotted in 1959, the Montgomery boycott, it lasted over 1 year, shut down the bus system. That was the year I was born. I don't know, but
55.
55, okay. They didn't have no fear.
Well, I think one of the things what we take a look at when we look at a lot of things is that we all were in the same boat. Mm-hmm. As a people, we were all in the same boat, and so Black Wall Street was a tremendous display across the country of black folks supporting black businesses and understanding our ability to turn the money over in our communities. And so, you know, when we look around now, it becomes difficult in many arenas for black entrepreneurs to get a large level of support from us. And somehow we've got to go back and reclaim that. If I went to work for somebody else, I'm all right. But if I did that same job myself, I may not have the same clients. So we've got to find a way that we can turn, as they used to say, to each other and begin to be supportive of each other. You know, we talk about Selma. Go down to Selma and see who attends. Talk to John, talk to Brian Stevenson, if you will, and see who's supporting that museum down there. It's hard. I was talking to a group about taking the trip. Their big question was, how much was I going to make? I said, ask Christian Tours, how much do they make when they do a tour?
That's right.
Ask Kelly Tours how much they make when they do your tour. Why is it that I can go in and I can be a tour guide for any of those folks and they pay me well,
because y'all paid them well. But now on my tour, they told me I didn't charge enough, so it must not be as good. So a lot of times it's us, and we're not there. We're not in that same boat, that collective talent base for Black Wall Street. And you look at what Auburn Avenue used to be. You look at what Badersford Road used to be. In my hometown, you look at the businesses that were on West Broad Street. You got a man who shines shoes, sold magazines, a little bit of everything else, and he sent 4 kids to college doing that.
That's right.
And so I'm saying that if we pull back together with some of that same kind of thing and be supportive of it, you could find 5 newspapers at his shop. You know, the other side of somebody read those papers too. So we're not doing that in the same way, and we got to find a way to turn to each other for some of that kind of support.
Okay, Winston.
Well, I graduated high school in 1967, and I looked at the yearbook from every year. Do the same thing with your yearbook. Do the same thing with your yearbook. Look in the back of it where they have ads, and look and see who the advertisers were in your class, in my class of 67, and then look and see who the advertisers are in there today. I guarantee you 90% of the businesses in your yearbook and my yearbook were Black-owned community businesses. And if you go into some of the yearbooks today, they're probably corporate sponsored, major bank sponsorships or whatever, but they're different. And we have to lean on and depend on each other.
Okay, Winston. Ken, you're wrong.
I got to get out of here for a 10:30 meeting, but I wanted to just ask a question about how you felt about federal support during this time. A lot of people don't really think about the idea of, after the Voting Rights Act, like the Freedom Riders, the law was already passed on the books, and even Kennedy, both of them, would look at actions like the Freedom Riders and see them as pesky, you know. But again, the law was already changed. It was just encouraging people to, you know, participate in the system. Did you feel like when they would go and see this and meet this confrontation that there should be a need for federal support to, you know, assist in these actions, being that you just, again, encouraging participation in a law that has already been passed? So they weren't breaking laws, you know, because the federal law was already passed. Where was the feeling of federal support during these stands?
Well, you have to understand the time, and then understand Bloody Sunday. Understand people like Cecil Williams. A whole lot of folks, a whole lot of things happen with nobody looking. And so what happened, we wound up with somebody there to tell the story. Selma erupted on TV. The whole world saw what we were saying. The federal support was not like somebody running to your aid. It happened because somebody had to do something. I mean, Dr. King and the rest. The local government was not going to do anything. And so the federal government, when you have a nonviolent confrontation, and you stand, you can be beat down when you're standing by yourself. If those guards were not there, there would have been a whole lot more heads whipped on that second journey than were on the first ones. So I think in those cases, federal intervention was what had to happen. But now, you know, one of the things that happened as well is that there were laws on the book, but no attitudes changed. And in some cases, not even ours. You know, if I'm gonna go into your restaurant and I know I got a chance of being beaten, I'm not gonna eat there. I don't know what you might put in my food. You know, so we did not do a whole lot of things. And that my test is the hair on the back of my head. You know, when it stands up, I may turn around even today. When you go places and you can feel like you got a problem. So that for me is a simplistic answer, but I think the federal intervention, had it not happened, when Kennedy sent Bobby down there, and so, you know, but it took until Johnson
got in for there to be change, there were a lot of people beaten. Never hit TV, never hit the press. And so the federal government had to do something because there was pressure brought to bear.
I just want...
Just one thing, I want to go back to this point earlier. There was a young brother named Burl Jordan. Anybody from Charlotte remember?
What's the name?
Burl Jordan, you wouldn't know him.
Burl.
Yeah,
okay.
Burl Jordan was an outstanding student athlete from West Charlotte High School. He went off and played football at Maryland, Morgan State. But bottom line is, he left Charlotte. But his family was a prominent family. They owned the Varsity Grill. The Varsity Grill restaurant they had 2 locations. Burl, after college, comes back and decides he's going to run for county commission, the first black to run for Mecklenburg County Commission. And he was leading protests for integration and all these things, and his daddy told him. Now, mind you, his daddy was a Pullman porter on the railroad and had 2 restaurants and enough money to send a daughter to a private school, Mather Academy in South Carolina. And he told Burl, he said, look, I don't understand why y'all out here protesting so y'all can go eat in the white man's restaurant. All that's going to do is everybody going to start going to the white man's restaurant and stop coming to ours. And they were one of the premier places that black folk went to eat and have affairs and events and so forth. And what happened? Well, now we see. We don't have those.
Let's give these gentlemen a round of applause. More importantly, this is something that Steve Crump pulled together, and we give honor to him and keep him in your prayers. And we are so grateful for the fact that we could get together on this date, on the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and to hear all this history and to have some young folks among us. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you again, Ken and George, for sharing and for the questions that we've had, from you all that have participated. And just remember, Steve in your prayers, and that we need to move forward, and all of the conversations that we're having today, they don't need to stop today. We need to continue this type of dialogue. Thank you all so much, and we'll hear a few more minutes. So if you have any announcements, you can make some announcements or just pass them on to Steve, because he will put them on our website. Sarah Stevenson's Tuesday Forum website.
I would just like to announce that everybody under the sound of my voice, and those who may see this later, please offer a prayer for Steve. Some things I talk, but then some things also really get me at heart. And Steve Crump is one of those people that strikes me at heart, because this is a genuinely good brother, undeserving of a lot of the things that have happened to him. But know that everything Steve Crump has done has come from his heart, and many of those things that he has done came from his pocket, because he didn't have some of the financial support from some elements that he needed. So please pray for Steve, and